Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is an IR sensor. Infrared sensor. This emits light. This detects it. And you've got 3 pins here, an output, a ground, and a power source 5 volts. Now these, got a few of these, well, got about 10 of these on Amazon for around $10, $12. Shipping was probably another $5. They're not cheap as chips. A reed switch is way cheaper, by the way. I mean, about 25 cents for a reed switch. So €2 might be cheap, but it's not if you're doing a lot of them. Okay, so here's the little circuit set up. We've got the IR sensor, power source, voltage regulator there because it only goes off 5 volts, and that's 9 volts. So it needs it, the input to it is 5 volts. And if I put this in front of it, you see the green light goes on, so it means it's detecting it. And you can adjust the sensitivity of these to make it, detect it up here. It's quite good. The thing about an IR sensor though, it doesn't work with a black surface. It needs to be a kind of a light reflective surface. Oh, that's, yeah, like so. Okay. So now, the thing about an IR sensor is that the output from it is a bit odd. So I've got a multimeter over here, and I'm going to show you what the output from the sensor is. Now, I'm connected the wrong way around. It really doesn't matter that much, to be honest with you. But what we've got there is that the output from the IR sensor is 4.86 volts, rounded up to 5 volts. So when it's inactive, it's giving a high voltage output. When it gets activated, yeah, not working. Okay, just had to do a little bit of fiddling there. When it's activated, it gives a low voltage, 0.14, which is near to 0, as makes no difference. So that's quite unusual for a sensor, that when something happens, it goes low, as opposed to give something positive out. Now that's all very well. You can read a low signal with Arduino, with digital pins. It'll read high or low, and therefore it'll do something. But for setting it up hardware wise, it gets a little bit more complicated. Well, not too much. So begs the question, do you really need to use an IR sensor? Would something else simpler be better? Simplest is always better, and cheapest is always better. Simpler, cheaper is always better. Okay, just as an aside, well, not an aside, this is a multimeter. This is so handy for lots of things. You can measure DC voltage, AC voltage, current, and resistance. It's just so handy. You'll pick these up on specials in Aldi or Lidl for around 10-15 euros. They're well worth buying. Once you have one, you'll realize how often you use one for checking circuits, for making sure things are right. You'll just be surprised, and you learn how things work by using the multimeter. You'll understand it better. Okay, I have a circuit set up here with the IR sensor. So if I activate the sensor, it is turning on an LED, as you can see. Now, okay, so what I'm doing is I'm activating this relay. We've talked about relays before. In this case, I have the LED connected to common, normally open. So when the relay doesn't activate, there's no current through. When I do this, I am getting current through the relay, and it's active, and it's changing it from that's not working for me. Okay, a little bit of a problem there. It wasn't activating. It is now, as you can see. I had to change over the battery. Okay, it's not working either. Okay, these little glitches are kind of instructive in their own sense, because things don't always work out the way I want them to. I've changed the power source over here to a 12 volt power supply as opposed to a 9 volt battery. It's still going through the voltage regulator, so I'm feeding 5 volts through these things. What happens is the batteries just drain after time, and there's not enough juice to actually power that and the relay, even though the relay is a 5 volt relay. So it just always needs a little bit more juice. It's working fine now, as you can see. What's happening in this circuit is I am using a transistor as a switch, effectively as a switch to switch on the relay. Now it's called a PNP transistor as opposed to an NPN. I'm just going to show you a circuit diagram now. Okay, here's our circuit diagram, and you can see here I set a 12 volt source, probably for a reason, because it doesn't work, because it needs to work through that. What the PNP transistor does is, and you need to maybe look up a little bit about transistors. It's not something we're going to go into here now. They're complicated. A little bit of studying, they're not so much. How a transistor works is it switches on the current here through the coil if something happens at the base. Normally transistors work off that when the base is high, in other words a higher voltage, it allows current to flow through what we call the deflector emitter. And PNP works the other way around, that when the base, which is this one, goes low, in other words the 0 volts or the 0.15 volts, it activates, it acts as a switch. So NPN is base, when the base is high, greater than 0.7, and here it activates and switches on the transistor. With a PNP, it works the other way around. When this is low, which is what we're producing a low output from the IR sensor when it is activated. Okay, there's the transistor. It's quite small, as you can see, and they are cheap as chips, to be perfectly honest. If you buy them in bulk, which I did, I have way too many of them. Okay, so just a quick look at our circuit one more time. So when you activate the IR sensor, its output goes low, and because we have the PNP there, it opens, if you like, the transistor to make current flow. Little resistor there of 1K, so we're not feeding too much current back to the IR sensor. And you might say, well, why not use the Arduino? Because you don't need to. Arduino in a circuit adds a lot of expense and a lot of complexity. If you have a simple operation, i.e., if something happens, turn something on, Arduino will do that, but you're adding a complication. If you have lots of decisions to make, or if there's several things that can happen and then you make decisions, well, then Arduino is coming into its own. But for simple applications, don't use Arduino. Get to know the hardware, you learn more. Okay, so that's IR sensors over and out.